Everyone says I love you, but just what they say it for I never knew. It's just inviting trouble for the poor sucker who says I love you.
I love good music.
So do I. Let's get out of here.
Sit down.
Lieutenant? Why weren't the original indictment papers placed in my portfolio?
Why, I didn't think those papers were important at this time, Your Excellency.
You didn't think they were important. Do you realize I had my dessert wrapped in those papers?
Hello, YouTube and YouTubettes. Welcome to another Marx Brothers movie review. Today we're reviewing Duck Soup. I am Robbo.
And I'm Becko.
This came out on November 17th, 1933.
When the tiny nation of Fredonia goes bankrupt, its wealthy benefactor, Mrs. Teasdale, insists that the wacky Rufus T. Firefly become the country's president, sensing a weakness in leadership. The bordering nation of Sylvania sends in the spies Pinky and Ciccolini to set the stage for a revolution. As Firefly clashes with the Sylvanian ambassador, plenty of mayhem ensues and the countries verge on all-out war.
Becko, tell us who is in this movie and who they play.
Groucho Marx plays Rufus T. Firefly. Margaret Dumont is Mrs. Teasdale. Harpo plays Pinky. Zeppo plays Bob Roland. Chico plays Ciccolini. Louis Calhern plays Trentino. Edgar Kennedy plays the street vendor. Raquel Torres plays Vera Marcal. Edmund Breese plays Xander.
Okay, Becko, what was your thoughts on the story of Duck Soup?
Duck Soup had a pretty solid plot line. However, there were times that it just sort of went to a direction that was a little bit wacky and unexpected. But the storyline itself was pretty good, and you could actually follow it. It wasn't just a bunch of slapstick back to back. There was actually a good, solid storyline.
I think the first half of it, or maybe a little past that, up until maybe the mirror scene, it seemed like a pretty normal plot line and Marx Brothers movie. But then the second half of it, or after that, maybe it's the last quarter of the movie or whatever, it gets really weird. And this one, this one I think had the most Monty Python-esque feel to it, especially towards the end where it gets really weird. And I think this was the movie that inspired Monty Python the most.
Yeah, it was definitely a bit avant-garde. Just the direction they took it, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Any scenes that stuck out in terms of the storyline? I think for me, it was, I would say when they're introducing Groucho at the beginning, it sort of set an idea, although that's a song. I wrote Hail Fredonia, but I think that introduction to everything was really good. Sort of set an idea of where things were kind of going, the craziness of it. And Groucho doesn't even show up as they are introducing him. So you already have the idea that this woman, for whatever reason, is depending on Groucho, which really doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I didn't write down a specific story scene, but the whole war at the end was probably my favorite story scene. It kind of, by the time it got to the war section, any ties to common sense or like reality had kind of gone out the window.
Yeah, that's a great stuff too. They put in a lot of crazy shtick in that war. Mm-hmm. So, what's your overall score for the story?
For storyline, I gave it a score of 9.
And I gave it an 8. All right, so next we'll talk about the quality of the movie. So, what are your overall thoughts? Anything that has to do with the quality or the costuming or the sets or whatever?
I thought the quality was pretty good. They jumped around a little bit as far as costuming, but they did it in a consistent way. At the beginning, there was almost like a Eastern folk European flair to the costumes that kind of reminded me of like Eastern Europe folk wear, mainly in the ensemble in the background had that type of costumes, which made sense because it was supposed to be sort of a fictional European nation.
Mm-hmm.
What was funny though is there was a scene where the Marx Brothers are on a stage, and it's almost like they're quoting poetry, and they talk about two if by land, one if by sea.
Yeah.
But they're wearing like early American soldier costumes from like the 1700s.
Yeah.
And then from there to the end, the whole entire war scene, they're switching from like World War One costumes to just all kinds of different costumes. I think at one time Groucho's wearing like a Napoleon costume. Like it switches from different
And
eras.
what do you call it? Like pioneer.
Oh yeah, like the old Western kind of general with
Yeah, there's a few of them. I can't remember
Civil
all of them.
War and different
Yeah.
things. So
Uh-huh.
it was funny that every time that there was a new scene, it's like they were in a different
I think
era.
I might be wrong, but I think Groucho was the only one that was changing costumes. I don't remember the other ones. I think the other ones were always in the same, but I could be wrong.
Possibly, but they weren't all dressed like whatever the modern day soldier costume would have been dressed.
Yeah.
I think Harpo had a pretty over the top costume.
Yeah. I think a lot of those changes were on purpose for artistic reasons, just to be wacky. There was one part in the Hail Fredonia song where Groucho has his trousers up, but there's like an editing issue where in one scene he has a different stance, and then it cuts and has a different stance, and like I think that might have been an error, but given the movie itself, it almost adds to the zaniness of it all.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that the sets and the view of everything was a bit better than Horse Feathers, but not as good as Monkey Business. There was a few editing issues, as I mentioned in this one, but not as many. Horse Feathers had a lot more, it seemed like. But yeah, I think this was a very good quality movie. So what score do you have for the quality?
For the quality, I gave it an 8.
And I also gave it an 8. All right, the music. Any memories? There wasn't that much. There was quite a bit at the beginning, but most of it was not.
Yeah, there were two kind of big songs close to the beginning, the Hail Fredonia and kind of introducing Firefly and all of that, which was a good song and funny.
Yeah.
I think my favorite song was the war song, which kind of came out of nowhere, and it reminded me of like old Civil War type songs. Like they were definitely going for that type of theme, and they even put in like a Whistling Dixie interlude, because going to war back in the day, and then especially during the Civil War, it was almost like an exciting, fun thing. Like they were happy to go to war. And so that's sort of the idea that they played up there is
they're square dancing and like a happy
that they're
song.
excited to be going to war, which is not the reaction we would get nowadays for sure. But the song was pretty funny, and it highlighted all the different Marx Brothers, and you actually see Chico singing. Now I don't know if you can really hear him, but you see him singing, and it features Zeppo and all of them. So
now there's a point where Zeppo kind of speaks his line. In Firefly, fireflies to die.
You wonder if he's doing that just for emotional effect,
or if he really can't sing.
Because it's hard to tell. I mean,
Mhm.
it sounds like he should be able to
Right. That the
sing
other
well,
times
but
I've heard he's lip syncing, but I don't know if it's recorded, if his voice is recorded on those scenes or not. But that's kind of one of those mysteries.
yeah.
But to me, it wasn't a big problem. I think I think it came across like an emotive spoken song that you
Mhm.
sometimes see in musicals.
Yeah.
In that scene, I loved it was over the top what the crowd was doing. Like everybody was copying what the Marx Brothers were doing.
Mhm.
I think my favorite song I put was "Hail Fredonia." No, I take that back. I was reading for a favorite story scene. To War, yeah, I have the war song as well.
Okay.
I think this is the first Marx Brothers movie in chronological order that doesn't have Chico playing the piano or Harpo playing the harp.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And so that's kind of interesting. What is your overall score for music?
My overall score for music is 6.
And I also gave it a 6. I think that the songs that they had were great, but there just wasn't enough music to
Mhm.
warrant something higher than that. Okay, so in the acting and performances, let's start with the non-Marx Brothers.
There were some really good characters in this. Margaret Dumont's character didn't really stand out as much in this one as it has in past movies. I mean, she's always great, but it was definitely not my favorite Margaret Dumont movie. The villain, if you can call him that,
Mm-hmm.
who is the leader of Sylvania, as well as the Vera, the Spanish woman, were both really good and really entertaining. I think my favorite character, non-Marx Brothers character, was and what's the character's name? Do you remember?
Trentino?
Trentino.
Yeah.
I think he was my favorite. He was a
Mm-hmm.
great actor, and the way he reacted to Firefly and how
Mm-hmm.
he was offended by a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you look at, I think we were talking about it when we watched it, is that he's really not a villain.
Right.
There's nothing he does that's
Groucho's probably
evil.
worse than
Yeah,
him.
definitely Groucho is
Mm-hmm.
worse.
Yeah.
And it's funny that they go to war simply because he offended him.
Yeah.
People don't normally go to war just because somebody says something mean to somebody else. So that was kind of funny too. But yeah, that character and even some of the small little characters like in the courtroom scene and the gentlemen that are in the boardroom.
Yeah.
And then also a really incredible person who I should have also listed as a favorite is the lemonade vendor.
Yeah.
He doesn't say much, but his reactions to everything is just
Mm-hmm.
incredible. And that
I
whole
think he's been in
whole
Laurel
scene.
and Hardy movies. I could be wrong, but
Yeah, I could definitely see him in some other like
mhm.
slapstick comedy from that era.
Yeah, I feel like the supporting cast was as good as there have been in any of the movies.
Hmm.
Trentino, although I agree he's not really a villain, but he's the best in terms of quote unquote villains. As
Hmm.
far as acting, I think he was the best actor. That Spanish lady was also a great actress. And my favorite that I have listed is the lemonade stand guy. And
Yeah.
I also agree that Margaret Dumont, she was very, it was kind of odd because usually when she's a bit more, what do you call it, like stuck up or rich,
Hmm.
high society, she hates Groucho. But in this one, she's very high society, but she loves Groucho.
Hmm.
In a sort of, even though Groucho's very mean to her, but
Yeah.
she's very supportive of him.
Hmm.
So it's kind of odd in that way, but she does good as always. But my favorite is the lemonade stand guy, and that's another thing is when you think of villains, Chico and Harpo sort of are probably worse than he is. They're
Yeah.
kind of teasing him more than he is them. He's just wants to be left alone.
Yeah.
All right, for the Marx Brothers. So what do you think of each of those characters, Becko?
So I wrote down here, and now that I think about it, it's coming back to me. But my favorite Marx brother in this one was Chico. I felt like he has a lot of confidence. Like he's very he has like that swagger, I guess you could say. But in this one, like he was nicer and somehow like more likable than sometimes he is because he's almost like a little bit grouchy in some of them. I mean, he was in this one too, but he definitely is pretty funny in this one and stood out to me.
Yeah, talking about my favorite is Groucho in this one. I think he's definitely the lead, and it
Hmm.
kind of the story revolves around him quite a bit. With Chico and Harpo, I think talking about good guys, bad guys, they take both sides. Somehow they're spies for Trentino. Other times they're spies for Groucho.
Yeah.
Uh, they even spy on Groucho and get caught. And
Hmm.
Harpo with the mirror scene with Groucho. And I think Zeppo takes a big step back to what he was in the first couple of movies,
Yeah.
and it has a much smaller role. But Harpo is very funny, but I think he isn't as good in this one.
Hmm.
And but Groucho definitely he has some great lines in this one. One of my favorite is he goes, "Do you find this clear?" And he goes, "Clear? A 4-year-old boy can understand this report. Run out and find me a 4-year-old boy. I can't make head or tail out of it."
Hmm.
And just yeah, and I feel like, and then like with the war scene, I don't know if it was Groucho's idea to change clothes every scene,
Hmm.
or what, but also Groucho and Harpo, when it's just the two of them, it is magic. Chico and Harpo is kind of, I think, equal to Laurel and Hardy,
Yeah.
and Chico and Groucho is kind of like Abbott and Costello. But
Hmm.
Groucho and Harpo, when they're together, is just something completely unlike anything else. And they
Yeah.
have a short clip where Groucho's asking, well, first of all, Harpo's talking on the phone using his horns,
Oh yeah.
and then he's asking him about questions, and Harpo's answering in tattoos. And it's very short, but that's a very good scene.
Yeah. Their dynamic is definitely
Mhm.
different
So
from the
my favorite
others.
is Groucho.
Hmm.
And so overall, what would you give the performances?
I would give the performances for this one a 9.
And I also give it a 9. Okay, now about the humor. What is your thoughts on the humor?
There were definitely a lot of really funny scenes that felt more like complete. They felt more like polished and not so like ad libby like in some of the other movies, which is it's not necessarily good or bad, it's just different, but just really really good well written funny scenes. The scene with the lemonade stand is just completely like could be in any movie. It's not necessarily connected to this
Hmm.
plot, but I feel like it's perfect for it, and it worked well, and it's such a good scene that kind of builds on itself.
Hmm.
And then there's another random scene that brings that character in again, where Harpo hides in the bathtub
Oh yeah.
and he comes home. So you're like, oh, it kind of came full circle, and
Mm.
they've
That's
bumped into
another
that
thing that
guy
makes
again.
Trent or the lemonade stand guy is actually a better person than Chico and Harpo are,
Hmm.
because Harpo's cheating on his wife. Or
Yeah,
actually, I don't even know because he was laying with his horse, not with the woman. But
yeah,
yeah, I think the the comedy was very high tempo, and there was some slapstick and there was other things, but I think they were
hmm,
trying different things as well, like the mirror scene, which
yeah,
is actually reminiscent of. I bet there was things like that in silent film kind of comedies. So it's
mm-hmm,
probably kind of a throwback to that kind of style. But when you
definitely.
have the three Marx brothers, minus Zeppo, all dressed up like Groucho, they look exactly the same.
They do,
But
yeah.
but it was really funny. And also, I one of the lines Groucho said was uh, when they lock him in the bathroom, and he's like, "Let me out," and he goes, "I'll consult my lawyer about this as soon as he graduates from law school." And just one of those funny lines, but
Yeah.
but I think, like I said, towards the end, it takes the comedy to a very creative level where it's not necessarily slapstick or laugh out loud funny. It's just weird, starting with that stage where they're on stage,
Yeah.
and then it gets into the war when all kinds of weird things happen. When Harpo's out in the middle of battle with a "Join the Army, See the Navy" sign
Yes.
in the middle of a battle. Then you have all those monkeys and whales, and it's like just all kinds of craziness in that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think this is a great creative comedy. And so, what's your overall score for the humor?
Overall score for humor is an 8.
And I gave it a 10. So, what was your overall score for Duck Soup?
My overall score for this movie is an 8.
And I give it an 8.5.
Now, Ciccolini, I want a full, detailed report of your investigation.
All right, I tell you. Monday, we watch the Firefly's house, but he no come out. He wasn't home. Tuesday, we go to the ball game, but he fool us. He no show up. Wednesday, he go to the ball game, or we fool him. We no show up. Thursday was a doubleheader. Nobody show up. Friday, it rained all day. There was no ball game. So we stayed home. We listened to her over the radio.
Then you didn't shadow Firefly.
Oh, sure, we shadow Fire. We shadow him all day.
But what day was that?
Saturday. That's some joke, eh, boss?
You expecting somebody?
Yes.